We all watched him grow up before our eyes. Parker Schnabel, the golden boy of Gold Rush, the young prodigy who took over his grandfather's mine and turned it into an empire. He was determined, sharp, and fearless. But behind that hard hat and million-dollar stare, there was something else. Something deeper. Something they tried to warn us about. From crew walkouts and silent feuds to moments the cameras never aired, Parker's journey wasn't just about gold. It was about obsession, pressure, and a path that was slowly pulling him into darkness. Long before he struck it rich, insiders whispered that Parker was different. Too driven, too intense, and too willing to sacrifice everything for one more ounce of gold. But no one listened. Not the producers, not the fans, and certainly not Parker himself. Now, at 29, the toll of years spent under the weight of impossible expectations is starting to show. The smile is thinner. The glint in his eye, fading. Was it worth it? That's the question he's never dared to answer. Until now. Because what's coming out of the Yukon isn't just gold, it's truth. And it may be more valuable than anything Parker's ever dug up. Before he was a reality TV star, Parker Schnabel was just a teenage kid walking the gravel roads of Haines, Alaska, under the shadow of his legendary grandfather, John Schnabel. At just 16, while most kids were trying to pass high school math or figure out prom dates, Parker was stepping into the role of a mine boss, one of the youngest to ever do it on national television. Gold Rush wasn't just a show for him. It was a proving ground. The moment he appeared on screen with that steely-eyed focus, fans knew this wasn't your average reality star. But behind the scenes, whispers started early. Some crew members noted how unusually intense Parker was for his age. Perfectionist, restless, a little too obsessed with the numbers, the dirt, the goal. And when his grandfather stepped back and gave Parker full control of the big nugget mine, many questioned whether the pressure would break him or forge him into something even harder. Turns out it did both. The early seasons portrayed him as the underdog, fighting equipment breakdowns, harsh winters, and doubters twice his age. He carried the weight of his family's legacy on his young shoulders, and viewers couldn't help but cheer him on. But what the audience didn't see were the cracks forming. Crew members began cycling in and out. There were arguments, tense, off-camera moments that hinted at a storm building beneath Parker's quiet confidence. And yet every time he hit his goal, we all celebrated. We applauded the grit, the grind, the hustle. We told ourselves this was what success looked like. But there were quiet warnings, small comments from co-workers, producers, even rivals, that Parker was burning himself out. That the gold was becoming a kind of addiction. Some called him a genius, others called him a ticking time bomb. Still, we watched, mesmerized, as he turned tens of thousands of yards of frozen earth into multi-million-dollar paydays. We convinced ourselves that Parker was invincible. After all, how could someone so young, so focused, fall apart? But beneath the surface, he was already changing. Gone was the wide-eyed teenager. In his place was a man who didn't celebrate victories. He expected them. Every season became a war. Against nature, against machines, against people, and slowly against himself. He was chasing something deeper than gold, and he didn't even know it yet. His relationship with longtime crew members grew tense. His once strong bond with foreman Rick Ness would eventually fracture, and Parker's attitude began shifting from youthful passion to cold calculation. The cameras tried to keep it light, but longtime fans began to notice. That glint of joy? It was fading. The long hours, the isolation, the unrelenting pressure, it was taking its toll. And yet we kept watching. We admired the fire, ignoring the smoke. Because no one wants to admit that the hero they rooted for might be racing toward a cliff. Parker didn't slow down. He couldn't. The show demanded more. The fans demanded more. And Parker, well, he demanded perfection. But the boy we rooted for was slowly disappearing, replaced by a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and dug too deep. The warnings were there, but none of us were ready to hear them. Not yet. As the seasons rolled on, something began to change in Parker Schnabel's gold mining empire. Not in the rocks, not in the wash plants, but in the people standing beside him. In the early years, Parker leaned heavily on loyalty, surrounding himself with trusted names like Mitch Blaschke and Rick Ness. They were more than co-workers. They were comrades, pulling long hours in freezing weather, solving breakdowns with nothing but grit and duct tape. But as Parker's ambition grew, so did his demands, and slowly that bond began to unravel. Tension simmered just off camera. What fans saw was a hard-charging leader pushing for results. What the crew felt was the heat of impossible expectations, relentless pressure, and a young boss who refused to let anything slide. He'd outgrown the small-time operations. His mind was always on the next big move, the next cut, the next haul, the next million. But somewhere in that chase, he stopped hearing the people around him. Rick, once his right-hand man, began to distance himself, and eventually he left. Not with a bang, not with a meltdown, just a quiet exit that spoke volumes. Parker never said much about it on camera, but you could see it in his eyes. Something stung. And it kept happening. More and more longtime crew members left, and those who stayed looked increasingly exhausted. Rumors started circulating online about the grueling hours, the emotional strain, the tension on set. Parker, some said, had become impossible to work for. Others insisted he was just a perfectionist in a brutal industry. But one thing was clear: people weren't staying. Turnover became the norm. New faces came and went like shadows passing through the Klondike. And Parker, he pushed on, unfazed, or maybe just numb. Even when Carla Ann, the beloved wilderness guide, took a step back, fans began wondering if the emotional toll was catching up with everyone. And the most telling part? Parker rarely stopped to reflect. He didn't talk about the losses. He didn't explain the exits. He buried it under production schedules, sluice runs, and yardage goals. The same way he buried everything else. Some viewers admired that steel wall. Others began to see the price of it. Because leadership without connection turns into isolation. And that's exactly where Parker was heading, into a kind of emotional solitude that no amount of gold could fill. The Yukon is unforgiving. It's cold, brutal, and merciless. But what no one told Parker was that sometimes the real danger wasn't the permafrost. It was the silence left behind when your team walks away. And still he kept digging. The crew thinned, the eyes around him grew wary, and yet he stayed locked in, chasing something even he couldn't define. The show painted it as ambition. But those closest to him saw something darker, an obsession. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about proving something. To himself, to his grandfather's legacy, to the world, maybe even to the cameras that had been watching him grow up all these years. But how long can one man carry a mine, a show, and a broken team on his back before the weight finally crushes him? The truth is, the crew didn't leave because of the gold. They left because of the silence, the burnout, and the pressure cooker Parker had unknowingly created. They warned us he was pushing too hard, that something had to give. And it did. We just didn't want to see it. As the gold piles grew higher, so too did the invisible weight on Parker Schnabel's shoulders, a burden not of failure, but of success. He had done what few thought possible, turned a teenager's gamble into a multi-million-dollar empire in one of the most grueling industries on Earth. But somewhere in that climb, the line between passion and obsession began to blur, and Parker, once the fresh-faced kid with everything to prove, became a man haunted by the very thing he once loved. Viewers watched him hop continents in Gold Rush, Parker's Trail, chasing new challenges across Papua New Guinea, Australia, and South America. On the surface it looked like adventure, but behind the lens, the truth was far less romantic. Parker wasn't just chasing gold, he was running from something. Running from stillness, from quiet, from the haunting realization that no amount of wealth could bring him peace. He admitted it in fragments, moments where his voice would soften, his eyes drift. "I don't know why I keep doing this," he once said. "It's not about the money." And that's when you knew. Something deeper was cracking. He had sacrificed relationships, romantic, familial, and professional, all for the grind. His romance with Ashley Yule, one of the few people who brought lightness into his life, ended quietly and abruptly. Fans were heartbroken, but Parker? He barely acknowledged it. He buried it like everything else. When asked, he simply said he didn't make time for the relationship, that he was too focused on work. But the look in his eyes told another story, of regret, of longing, of a man who couldn't stop even when he wanted to. His grandfather, John Schnabel, was the only one who truly understood Parker's heart, and when he passed, it left a hole that no crew, no gold, no victory could ever fill. After John's death, Parker didn't break down. He pushed harder. He worked more, as if to fill the silence with the roar of engines and the grind of excavators. But the sadness never left. And over the seasons, it became more visible. His temper flared more often. He smiled less. He slept less. He trusted fewer people. And yet he couldn't quit. That's what obsession. Both his kingdom and his cage. He had everything, and yet he looked hollow. Fans started asking, where's the fire? Where's the joy? But Parker was too deep, too invested. He wasn't just working a mine. He was digging into himself, trying to find something that success had failed to give him. And maybe that's the part we missed. We celebrated his drive, his genius, his triumphs. But we ignored the cost. We didn't see the years slip by without pause. We didn't question why he never stopped to breathe, to live, to simply be. Those around him tried to say it, quietly, respectfully, that maybe he needed rest, that maybe the show should slow down, but no one wanted to pull the brakes on a gold mine. Not the producers, not the fans, and certainly not Parker. He kept saying he was fine, that everything was under control. But if you looked closely, you saw it. The loneliness, the fatigue, the emotional exhaustion of a man who had built everything, and yet couldn't remember why. They warned us this would happen, that you can't chase gold forever without losing something precious. And now, as Parker enters a new chapter, the question remains, how much more is he willing to lose before he finally stops digging? At 29, Parker Schnabel stands at a crossroads few ever see, one paved in gold, yet lined with ghosts. After more than a decade under the unrelenting gaze of cameras, machines, and the weight of expectations, he's finally begun to show us something he's never truly revealed before. Vulnerability. And it didn't come in the form of a breakdown or some grand revelation. It came quietly, in interviews, subtle moments, awkward silences, and fleeting expressions that suggested the armor was cracking. Parker has always been careful with his words, reserved, private, guarded. But in recent years, he's begun to admit what many feared all along, that the life he built might not be the life he actually wanted. In one interview, he confessed that despite the fame, despite the fortune, he felt alone, that he'd sacrificed too much chasing something he never fully understood. "I don't think I've figured out who I am outside of mining," he said. And there it was, the truth no amount of gold could bury. Parker Schnabel, the prodigy, the machine, the legend in the making, had finally stopped running long enough to see the toll. Friends gone. Relationships lost. Years blurred into a haze of deadlines, dollar signs, and cold northern nights. The cost of greatness was never the equipment or the long hours. It was the person he left behind along the way. His most recent seasons show a different Parker. Quieter, more thoughtful, less quick to argue. He's still driven, yes, but there's a sadness now. Like a man looking back at the empire he built and asking himself, was it worth it? And maybe that's the part they tried to warn us about all those years ago. That Parker wasn't just a miner. He was a boy searching for purpose, using gold as a map, hoping it would lead him to something real. But gold doesn't love you back. It doesn't talk to you at night. It doesn't heal old wounds or replace the people you've lost. And Parker, after chasing it for over a decade, is finally starting to see the hollowness behind the shine. He's opened up more about the struggles of leadership, the mental toll of being in charge, and the pressures of having the entire world expect greatness from him season after season. "I didn't realize how much of myself I was giving away," he admitted recently. Not in a dramatic breakdown, but in a quiet, measured tone that said everything. This was never just about mining. It was about identity, about trying to fill the silence left behind when his grandfather died, about living up to a legacy that was never supposed to be a prison. Fans who once cheered his every victory are now looking at Parker with new eyes, not as a gold-hungry boss, but as a young man finally confronting the weight of everything he's carried. And now, as he contemplates life beyond Gold Rush, the question isn't whether Parker will keep mining. The real question is whether he'll ever find peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from ounces or pay dirt, but from learning to let go. Maybe he already is. Maybe this quieter Parker is finally learning that strength isn't in pushing harder, it's in knowing when to stop. They warned us all those years ago that this journey could break him, that even the strongest hearts wear down in the Yukon cold. And maybe we didn't want to believe it. But now, watching Parker at 29, older, wiser, and finally honest with himself, we realize the truth was always there. We just didn't listen. So, sit tight, because once you hear what they tried to warn us about, you won't look at Parker Schnabel the same way again.